Hey everyone! This time on Tim Talks Audio, we continue the stock plug-in series, and this time we're going with the Phaser2. Since Studio One version 5 came out, they did a number of upgrades to the stock plugins. Today we're going to go over Phaser2, which is just a slightly modified and updated version of the stock Phaser plugin from Studio One. So if you're working in version 4 or earlier, the controls will all still be pretty much the same. And if you're working in version 5, yours is called Phaser2, and it'll be exactly the same. We're going to do a few different things in this stock plugin episode. I'm going to show you the Phaser2, how phasing came about, and how you can use a delay to create a very similar kind of phasing sound. There are pros and cons to each, but really we're talking about Phaser2, so let's dive into the DAW and take a look at the controls of Phaser2. So here we are inside of Studio One version 5, and here it is, Phaser2. This is the default setup. But let me explain what's going on in my chain real quick. We're using a guitar because usually when you think phasing, you think guitars. So first up, I have Ampire with the new high density pack installed because I am a Presonus Sphere member, and this comes included in your Sphere membership. I have this followed up with a guitar cabinet simulator. This is the GGD Studio Cabzilla, and it's just one of the presets that we have going on. And then everything's going into Phaser from here. The guitar we're working with was just a straight plugged in, it's my Les Paul right into my interface, and that's what the recorded signal is, and then that was the signal path. So very quickly, Phaser2 and what it's doing is applying a variable number of all-pass filters to your process signal or your source signal, whatever you want that to be. These all-pass filters are also feeding back into another set of filters, and the loop keeps going on and on. It's also blending it in with the original signal. So that's what a phaser is doing. It's taking a copy of the signal being fed in, and then it's adding it in after the original one, but only by some milliseconds. And Phaser2 is doing this numerous times, a variable number of times. Because of the number of delays or all-pass filters that are getting fed back into the signal, this is what causes that big amplitude or null of the frequencies and gives the phaser its characteristic sound. It's that stacking of all of the different delays onto one another while the original is still happening. This is that phaser sound. So now let's get into the controls. All the way on the left, we have stages. Stages selects how many of those all-pass filters you have going on. This is variable from 2 all the way up to 20, and we'll play around with the number of stages later. Speed adjusts the LFO time. This is a low frequency oscillator, and that varies not only the center pitch of the phaser, but the amount of time that these delays are coming after the original source signal. This can be adjusted anywhere from 0, so actually no change, all the way up to 10 Hertz. And like I said, this is a low frequency oscillator. 10 is very low, but for this, it's actually maxed out. We'll get into it. You also have the ability to turn on sync, and this will lock the phaser timing to the BPM of your song. Turn this on, and the typical sync selections are in there, all the way up to 4 bars, down to a triplet 64th note. Up next in the color section. The color section is where the modulation of the signal happens. So it will modulate the frequencies affected according to the limits from the range, with the center control being the midpoint. So your midpoint in this case is at 700 Hertz, and then the range gives us a percentage of how far up and down these filters are happening. So our center midpoint can go all the way down from 10 Hertz and then all the way up to 8K. So this is just the center point for the filters. Then the range control allows you to select how far from our center frequency that the shifting can happen. So you can go all the way up to 100% and do everything that the phaser can handle. So that's from 10 Hertz up to 8K. Or you can restrict it down to really only phase in a very small area around your center frequency. Then we have a few buttons. The top is a logarithmic sweep. With this engaged, it turns on a more logarithmic style sweep for our phaser, and with it disengaged, it's more linear. And you'll hear that there are differences between the two. Underneath that is the soft button, and this changes the wave style of those shifting frequencies, whether it be more of a triangle wave or a sine wave. When the soft button is engaged, this is the triangle, and with it off, this is our sine wave. And last but not least in this section is the feedback, and this works just like it would on a delay. It takes copies of the output signal and sends it back into the input of this processor. Then in our global section, we only have two controls. We have our usual mix knob, so we can do some in-plugin parallel processing. And we also have the stereo spread control, and you can move these all-pass filters more into the stereo field. At 0%, it's more mono, and then you can push things out by increasing the stereo spread to get a nice push towards your left and right. So that's all the controls for Phaser2. Now let's load it back to its defaults, and let's take a listen to what Phaser2 can do. Before we listen to what Phaser2 is doing, we'll listen to what our guitar is doing, and then we'll go back and drop Phaser2 in. So that's just our regular guitar tone. Now we'll turn Phaser2 on, and in its default setting, this is what it sounds like. So immediately we can hear the characteristic sound of a phaser, and you can hear it doing the sweeps all the way through based on our center frequency, which right now is at 700, and it has a really good range, so you hear it going really high and really low. Now let's go ahead and change some of the stages. This was 4 stages, like the default. Let's go ahead and crank this way up, and we'll put it to 18. Why not? Let's take a listen to this now. So with more stages, you do hear that there's a more robotic and sci-fi kind of sound to our phaser. It almost reminds me of like the 50s and 60s style sci-fi sounds you would hear. So let's put our stages back to something a little bit more manageable. Let's go with 7, and now we'll adjust the speed a bit. And you can hear it's doing exactly what we expected. I slowed it down, and you can hear that filter sweep going way down, and those delays are just coming with it, and everything is nice and slow. But we can also crank this way up. Let's take a listen to this. We can even take this and put it in tempo with our song. This almost gives it like a humanistic kind of character to it. It's a little bit like a Vox box for your guitar. That's the pedal where it feeds signal into a tube. That tube blows air in your mouth, and you have that attached to a microphone. It's a very similar kind of sound. It's not exactly the same, and it's not what that pedal does, but you can hear what's going on. Let's go even faster with our speed, and then we'll go really slow. So we were able to vary our speed according to the sync here. But like I said before, you can turn this off and have this adjustable up to 10 Hertz. We also haven't really been playing with the color section of all. Everything's been centered around 700 Hertz, and we've had a pretty wide range. But let me show you what we can do here. I'm going to keep it at 700, but reduce the range down. I've also brought our speed back to almost default. It's a little higher. Let's bring this range way down, and you'll hear that it doesn't move far from the 700 Hertz center. We're not nearly getting all of the highs we were getting before and the lows that we were getting before as well. Now that we have a nice narrow region, let's go ahead and crank this way up, and we'll get some of the presence at around 1.7K, and we'll keep our range low. So you can see it's really narrowing where those frequencies can get shifted around. I'm going to set everything back to default real quick, and now let's just go ahead and turn on and off the log sweep and the soft buttons, and you'll hear the before and afters. So you can hear there are some differences with soft or log sweep engaged and disengaged. With soft disengaged, we're now using our sine wave, and you can hear we don't get this spike of our frequencies within the phaser. It kind of eases into the top frequency and eases out and then starts dropping from there. Same thing at the bottom as well. Next, with our feedback, it almost adjusts where the resonance of the phaser is. I'm just going to hit play and play around with feedback a bit. I'm going to go all the way up and all the way down, and you'll hear that the resonance of the phaser changes. So when the phaser is at the top of the feedback and you hear more of the high frequencies, it actually kind of rolls those ones off a little because there's not as much signal being fed back into the phaser. But if we have the feedback all the way up, there is more resonance and there's more of that spike that's going on. So there it is. That's all the controls of phaser. I didn't go into the stereo spread because I'm just working with a mono guitar right now. But if you put this onto a stereo bus and you have more than just one instrument going on, like in this example, you will hear the stereo spread happen. Also with the mix control, it's parallel processing. You'll get more dry signal if you reduce the mix down and have more clean signal in instead of the wet signal, or dry versus wet. Now let me show you where phasing actually originated from. I'm going to turn Phaser2 off and switch over to analog delay. And what I'm going to do is turn off sync and use my millisecond control. And I'm going to drop it all the way down. Then I'm just going to hit play and slowly bring up the time control. As I come up, you'll hear different styles of effects. And I'm going to turn my feedback up to kind of emphasize this a little bit more. But you'll hear the change in the guitar sound, because not only do we have a blend of our wet and dry signal, but the length at which these delays happen will start to make this phase sound. It'll go through a few different ones, but eventually we'll get to the phaser sound. So here we go. We're starting at the slowest at 1 millisecond, and then I'm going to bring the time control up. So this is where phasing came in from. We're just adding delays of the original signal back to the signal in question. And that offset in time is what's causing the cancellation or amplitude of frequencies. Now, doing it with analog delay and kind of just dialing things in, it's not as smooth as just using the phaser, which is giving us the same timing offset that we need to get that really nice smooth wash sound that we're used to hearing with a phaser. So phasing is just adding more copies of the original signal back in based on how long after the original the copies are going to be coming back in. This is very similar to both flanging and chorusing, but the timings are different. Phasing, flanging, and chorusing are all kind of cousins. They're essentially the same, but with different timings, and they definitely have different sounds. So if you're interested in either the flange or chorus stock plugins, let me know in the comments below, and that'll be the next one up in the stock plugin series. That's all for now. If you found anything informative, please like and share the video. For more, visit timplansmom.com, and if you have a question, ask it in the comments and I'll answer it in a future video. Thanks for watching.